Welcome back to another episode on Inspiration Unleashed. Today we're looking at the UAP news for the previous week, or rather the last few days, things that have come out. So the first clip here is with James from Engaging the Phenomenon. He was on the Vetted podcast talking about his experiences, CE5, and what he's going to be doing in the future. So there's this little clip I'll play here, and then we'll move on to the other news.
Which I mean, I'll say it here. I guess I haven't really publicly announced it before, but I am working on a book that is going to exclusively focus on that component of the UFO phenomenon. So you got an exclusive right there, Patrick.
I love it. That's awesome. So you're saying like sighting versus interaction in that difference.
And right? which sightings, what's
that's cool too. What sightings were actually interactions?
Right. Well, what sightings are random, right? What sightings are random? And I say that because, like, even look
that's
at
interesting.
I'm gonna get into the later experiences, but like just to pivot for a second, is David Fravor's thing was not a sighting with the Tic Tac. It was an interaction. It was interacting with him and the other pilots, right?
That's a good point. That's a good distinction. You're right.
It wasn't a random. I mean, again, could they have come across each other random? Maybe, right? But to the point where they made contact, right, where their awareness of each other became apparent, they began to interact. He's circling and it's responding to him. That's, by definition, an interaction.
You're right.
Next, over on futurism, is an article talking about how Harvard scientists say there may be an unknown technologically advanced civilization hiding on Earth. Now, it is a hypothesis. They state that very clearly. It's just an idea of what if we run with this? Could it be possible? So they say, what if, stick with us here, an unknown technological civilization is hiding right here on Earth, sheltering in bases deep underground and possibly even emerging with UFOs or disguised as everyday humans. Needless to say, the researchers admit this idea of hidden crypto-terrestrials is a highly exotic hypothesis that's likely to be regarded skeptically by most scientists. Nonetheless, they argue, the theory deserves genuine consideration in a spirit of epistemic humility and openness. Now, this one's really interesting because channelers, they've been talking about this for a very long time. Now, of course, without direct proof, it's simply stories. But in a nutshell, the underwater civilizations are our ancestors, like our cousins. They were the remnants of the societies from Atlantis and Lemuria. When those continents were destroyed, they went to the mountains, they went underground, and some stayed here on the surface. And we could debate all day whether this is true or real. Some people do claim that they have physically visited these places. If you look into the accounts by JP on Dr. Michael Sala's channel or read the books, he has quite a few stories of going to the underground civilizations to visit the ant people that he calls them. This is a worldwide thing. There's all sorts of stories of people hanging out around Mount Shasta and all these other high energy places where they've been helped by people who seemingly just appear and disappear as quick as they came. And yes, it's a hypothesis that most scientists won't want to touch because their funding and their quote unquote credibility rely on them not going against the grain. They start going outside that little box that they've been told to stay in, they start to lose funding, credibility, like I said, and all sorts of other things. So it's about time people actually start looking into this. Now, the ironic part is you really won't be able to find any proof or data unless you raise your consciousness enough to, I guess, go and communicate, whether that's through meditation, channeling, or visiting physically in person. And of course, it's all going to be based on if you are able to, if they allow you and you have good intentions. Just like anything, they're not just going to open the doors for everyone, especially the skeptics. So that's the ironic part. The people looking for the hard, cold proof aren't at the level of consciousness they need to be to receive that proof. And the same can be said for extraterrestrials and everything else along that line. Anything deemed supernatural, when in reality, it's all natural. We've just been told otherwise. And again, links to all of these will be left in the description so you can check them out after and have a read through the articles and take a look at these videos. The first video clip I had showed you was James on the Vetted podcast. He mentioned about Commander David Fravor. So Mr. Fravor is actually here on the Merged podcast sharing his story. So a little over an hour and a half long. And so I'll just play the introduction here as well, and you can go ahead and check that out when you have time to listen to the whole thing.
In 1989, if you just said UFO, UAP, whatever in Washington, D.C., you'd have been laughed out of your seat in Congress. Well, now you've got active congressmen and women that are pushing policy who are literally diametrically opposed politically. But on this topic, it's bipartisan. There is no Republican or Democrat. It's like, what are we trying to do? And all people want to do is, this is not about little green men and what it is. If it leads to something like that because we have stuff, so be it. To me, it's not important. What's important is, from our incident onward, is how do we figure out what these are? How do they work? Can we use that technology? Because if anything our incident did, it happened 13 years after the fact when the New York Times article came out, because the New York Times article basically immediately removed the stigma.
From space news, they've announced the Pentagon is embracing SpaceX Starshield for future military SATCOM. The DoD currently buys Starlink's commercial internet service, but in the future, it also plans to acquire more than 100 Starshield satellites that would be government owned. Now, my question B is, what are they going to be doing with this? Is it just going to be strictly for their own communication, or is it going to be for creating some sort of satellite energy grid that they can use for, most likely, their own gain and not at all for the protection of the United States or humanity in general? Of course, that's just an opinion, and there's a little more information here on the debrief about Japan's launching of their own UAP investigation. They say a nonpartisan group of Japanese lawmakers says it plans to investigate sightings of unidentified flying objects, citing concerns over possible foreign surveillance efforts and other national security issues. And this whole national security thing keeps popping up. It's essentially how they were able to take this to Congress and everything else. Most likely it's going to be the same for every other country. What I'm curious about, though, is do they actually believe it's a national security issue, or are they just saying that so they can start pushing this stuff through? It's like Tim Burchett is really hammering down. He wants to know where the money is going, why these dollars aren't being accounted for. There are large chunks of money missing. So that's the avenue he wants to go down this route to actually get them to look at it. Because if they say, oh yeah, there's strange things in the sky, we want to know what they are, it gets shut down every time. It's been that way for 80 years. But if you say, let's follow the money, or it's a national security issue, it starts to get more pressure on the investigation to find out what's actually going on. So I really hope that they don't actually believe it's a national security issue. Because if there's another race out there trying to take over, I mean, they would have done it a long time ago. Dr. Greer says it best. The second we set off the first atomic bomb, they would have been all over us. How many space missions have humans gone on? How many times were weapons sent to space, right? There's no one out there trying to take over this planet. They would have done it a long time ago. And in fact, one could argue, listening to some channelers, looking into the ancient history, the Sumerian tablets, those kinds of things, we have been visited. We've always been visited. And we were taken over a long time ago when they started messing with our DNA. But that goes down a whole other rabbit hole. So, I mean, all these investigations, it's better than nothing, I suppose. Hopefully it leads somewhere and not to some sort of false flag operation or saying, oh yeah, our reports tell us it's a threat, so give us billions of dollars so we can investigate. And it's the same old story where the money starts to disappear. They're going to these secret projects and no one gets access to it. And the same old story plays out again and again. I trust that the earth, humanity, we are raising our consciousness enough that we collectively won't let that happen. But time will tell. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's UAP News video. Hopefully next week I'll have a little more to share, but that's it for now.